Containment series finale, Path to Paradise. Now, I think this was actually a pretty good finale. Actually, after watching the episode, I kind of looked up some stuff to see, like to really make sure like this is officially the finale and make sure I didn't screw anything up. And it turned out that this show wasn't really meant to be just a limited series event. It was kind of meant to go on to another season, and they kind of did the show kind of the way that they planned on doing it to begin with. They wrote it just the initial way and everything, and it kind of just came out the way that it did. And oddly enough, it actually wrapped up fairly well for a first season, or which ultimately ended up being a complete series. But it was meant to go on to at least a second season. Like, if there's an article that you can look up about excuse me, about some of the ideas that they had for another season, where they would introduce another, not exactly like they'd become a love interest later, but another person for Jake to interact with, another female character. And of course they would show what would happen with Lex after, of course, deciding to go within the Cordon, and kind of showing the full culmination of what would happen with Dr. Cannerts finding the vaccine, or finding, the other character. And there was more to it, but I just figured, as a limited series event, it was kind of like, okay, it wasn't like the full wrap up, but it was just one of those sort of things where it's a somewhat ambiguous ending, but that's kind of how it was meant to be. But there were certain things in there that I noticed. There's only one thing in that entire ending, because aside from them initially planning on making this longer than just one season, they actually kind of wrapped everything up. Like, I would just assume, okay, well, of course you'd feel like there's more to see, but Lex coming into the Cordon, you could imagine like that would kind of just work out. And they also found the vaccine, so it would be, they found the vaccine, he's in the Cordon, they, exposed Lammers and everything like that. So they pretty much wrapped up all this stuff, and it was kind of just left somewhat open, like, okay, well, he joined Lex joined Jana in the Cordon, but Cordon and Jake also found, this vaccine. So it's like, well, they found the vaccine, so, you could just imagine how fast it could wrap up. But obviously there was stuff to see, but it was closed enough to where it's like, that could have been the ending, and it would have worked out perfectly fine. And the only other thing, like, really the only thing that was completely left, like, wide open, that didn't have a true solution, was Mies. That was, like, the only thing, because he shot the other guy in the head, and he wasn't with the group like I thought he was when that first happened. And he shoots him in the head because his plan is to escape. And there is something, going on with that, like, him wanting to get out to his family and stuff like that. So that was the only thing that really wasn't resolved by the finale, because they kind of introduced a brand new element of him completely escaping the Cordon and trying to get to his family now. So that was like the one thing that wasn't resolved, and unfortunately we won't get to see it resolved because CW didn't want to pick it up for a full, as a brand new series. They just wanted excuse me, to do it as a limited series. So that's the only unfortunate thing that's really left open. And of course the fact that based on the article that I read, there was more content that they could have created for the show, which, it's clear to see what they could have done, because it's really easy to see, like, oh, well, we could have seen what happened with Lex after joining the group inside the Cordon, Jake and Lex teaming up now as, officers within the Cordon and stuff like that, and of course the idea behind the vaccine, and just everything going on there, and what would happen, who would take over for Lammers, little stuff like that. It was very clear, like, that could have been expanded upon if they'd gone on to a second season. But I think it oddly wrapped up really well. Like I said, that's how they planned to end it, but it just happened to complete most of the tiny story arcs, and they just had like that one little thing with Mies that was like really the biggest cliffhanger. Everything else is kind of wrapped up, or you could see exactly what would happen. Like, oh, they found the vaccine. Obviously, it would work out. Let's join them inside the Cordon, and he wouldn't be there for too long because of the whole vaccine thing. There are little interactions that we can imagine how they would have acted out. But for the most part, everything was fairly tightly wrapped up. And it does suck to hear that the plan was to get a second season, and I would have loved that, because I really did enjoy the show. I thought it was really fun, and I would have loved to have seen a season 2 where all the characters have kind of especially by the end of this episode, everyone's kind of fallen into a very specific place within the Cordon, and Lex coming in to join some of those people within the Cordon. So there was still quite a bit to see there. Like, there's more to see of these characters and what could happen. Of course, the group going back, Jana and Susie going back and finding Sam and being like, hey, we couldn't get out. Them taking Quentin back to Jake and saying, hey, we couldn't get out. Little stuff like that. So there's definitely more to see, but I like the way that it wrapped up. It's unfortunate that, of course, technically it's not the ending. It wasn't really meant to be the ending, but CW didn't want to pick it up as a full series or anything like that. So that sucks. I would love to see it come back and get a season 2. Apparently the show that it's based off of, the UK show, that is getting a second season or second series, as they say there. So, I don't know, I might check it out. I might watch that version because that's, what Containment is based off of. So I might, we might be able to check those out because all the characters have the same names and stuff like that. They're all just British. So, I might end up checking that out just to get more on the story. But I like the way it wrapped up. Of course it was meant to go on to be something else, but fortunately they did like a 1-season story, and they, kind of capped off pretty much every little story arc, or at least completed it just enough to where it's like, okay, it's not just left wide open like a normal TV show where it's like, oh, it's 3 seasons or 4 seasons in and they're leading into the next season, but they dropped all the ratings, so the show gets canceled after like 4 seasons and you just left on this giant cliffhanger or something. So fortunately it wasn't super crazy like that. It was like the little thing with Mies, but everything else was pretty much, self-contained, and I enjoyed that. I thought it was pretty well done. They exposed llamas at the end, which I thought was cool, and Lex and Leo's dad worked together to complete all of that, and Lex's dad finds Leo and everything, so they work together and expose llamas at the end. She gets busted, Mies, he escapes, and Lex decides that he's gonna go into the Cordon because he's with Jana. I was curious how that was gonna play out because of course it's Jana, so it's like it's the person that he's connected to on the inside. And I was so curious how that was going to play out. And ultimately he decides to go back with them. Because at first I just thought he convinced them to go back. And of course he'd be really sad. Like, I had to tell the woman I love to go back inside this, quarantine zone where she could be killed or something crazy like that. And then they go through and he actually ends up there behind him. I thought that was actually really cool. I was like, that's a cool way to do that. And, like I said, if unfortunately it didn't get canceled, it could have gone on, and it would have been really cool to see how that would have played out. And then we have, both Jake and Lex on the inside, and, how all that stuff would play out. Plus, with Lex being, at least for, the early part of the series, he was like, the face of everything, so, I mean, that kind of died down anyway, so there probably wouldn't have been any questions. But there would have been a lot of people on the force who would have noticed, like, he's gone. Like, he went into the tunnels, and he disappeared. We don't know what the heck happened to him. The other guy died because Mies killed him, so it's like there are 2 crazy little mysteries going on. So, there's, stuff like that would have been cool to see. But I think it wrapped up fairly well. It was entertaining watching them go through the tunnels and try to figure out how are we going to do this. How do we escape with them blowing up the tunnels? Lex figuring out that someone is working on the outside as well as on the inside to get these people out. And of course, it ends up being the guy who, he's like, there's only like 4 cops that we've seen, or 5 cops we know through the whole series, and it's Lex, Jake, the captain, Mies, and then the other guy that gets killed in this episode. So of course it ends up being the other guy who died in this episode that was helping. I was like, oh, he's the only other cop we know, so it was like, of course it's going to be that guy. But I just like how all that stuff played out, and we have Jake trying to figure out what's going to happen, and of course I forgot the guy's name again, the gang leader. I want to say it's like, all I remember his name, his brother's name was like Cinco. That's all I can remember. But he loses his brother in this one, but it leads to kind of the next step where it's like, oh, his eyes weren't bleeding and stuff like that. So it leads to a next step, and they do kind of the vaccine thing, and they try to bring people in, and even though he's mad at Dr. Cannerts, the gang leader, he does actually come in to get his blood test, and it ends up being the priest guy, or the preacher, whatever his thing is. I'm not really churchy, so I don't know the levels, but the guy, and it's like, oh, he's the one who I couldn't believe it. I'm like, holy crap. It makes a lot of sense though, because he was in the church with all these insanely sick people. I'm like, he's definitely dying. And I think I mentioned that when I saw that episode, like, this guy's going to be dead. And of course, he ends up being the one with the antibodies. And, it's like, we found you. And the first thing he said is like, God found me. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense in this situation, but whatever. And it was kind of funny when they did that, because it was funny because Jake was like happy, they were like happy, so, and then the guy turned around and he's like, God found me. And it seemed like Jake instantly went from like a smile just like, great, like fantastic. And then he looked at Cannerts and Cannerts looked at him, and I just thought that was a funny little scene. Like, clearly this guy's insane, like a bit too religious, because it's like, it just, like I said, it didn't really make any sense. Like, it was like, hey, we found you, and it's like, God found me. It's like, that doesn't, I don't know, that doesn't even actually make any sense right now. But they ended up finding, it ended up being that guy. And I thought that was kind of cool. It's like, that actually, if you go back to the episode where it's like, he should be dead, it makes a lot of sense now why he was, doing that. And it's like, how does he not get sick with all these people around, which technically was through sweat and stuff like that. So it could have easily been that they just didn't happen to cough. But he had the antibodies, so it made a lot of sense. So I thought that was really cool. Saddest thing ever, the old couple, Teresa's grandparents, that was like depressing at the end. I was like, I could not believe that that's how that played out, because my thing was like, oh, they'll finish it all off. And of course that was before I knew it was meant to go into a second season, before the creators realized that the CW just wanted to make it a limited series. But I just assumed everything would be fixed up and they'd find a vaccine really fast, and like I mentioned, like they do the little montage stuff and everybody, would be fine. And they're basically trapped at home because Birdie tries to leave, but he can't because he's injured too. So it's like, I only got like a couple blocks and he can't, he went back home. And it's like, well, there's really nothing I can do. Like, I have this giant gash, so I'm going to die, and I want you to kill me. Like, crush out the drugs and put it in and kill me. And it was just insanely sad. I was like, man, this is like super sad right now. So they actually end up dying. I would assume, based considering it's the ending, that's just what we have to assume, is they just flat out died and really no one found them or anything like that. So, that was just really sad to watch. I was like, man, this is like super sad. They're playing like the music and stuff, and then they drink the wine, and then Brady's wife realizes that he put the drugs in his wine as well, so that they would both die. And it's like, man, this is just super sad. I was very surprised that it ended that way. And I did kind of make a guess, like maybe some other people would die before it ended. And I guess they did. Especially considering it won't go into a season 2. We can't see if Teresa or Xander went back there to try to tell them, like, hey, because they kind of set up shop at her mother's store. So they had all that food, and it's like, hey, we can take food to you, which probably would have been something that happened if the show went on to a second season. One of them probably would have gone there and actually found Teresa's grandparents there knocked out, and they probably would have been able to actually save them because of just the way it went. But that was super sad. That was like kind of depressing, and I was like, man, this is gonna make me actually really upset. Like, I was very surprised by how sad it got, like in between all these moments of this group stuck in the tunnel, and then Lex trying to figure stuff out and everything else going on, and then they just had that moment when they just drink the wine and they're talking about dancing and stuff like that. I was like, man, this is super sad. It was incredibly well done, and it was just in between all this action, like kind of action stuff, so it was surprising. It just complete 180 from like, I shouldn't say like high octane action, but it was fairly intense just with all the stuff together. And then it did like a 180 to just very slow paced and very somber and sad experience. But it was incredibly well done. I really enjoyed that scene, but I was like, man, that is super sad and not what I was expecting at all, where they do like a double suicide thing. That was kind of crazy. But all in all, I still enjoyed this one. Of course, after reading the article and knowing what they had planned, and like there was a plan, like the person who was supposed to end up with Jake was like literally going to be dropped out of a helicopter into the quarantine zone. So I don't know what that would have entailed, like why someone would be dropped in, just all this other stuff. I would have loved to have seen it, and I highly recommend reading the article. Well, I've mentioned it now, so you might as well read it, because I was going to say, unless you don't want to be teased, but I've talked about it so much now, I guess you might as well read it. But that kind of, especially for people who may have wondered, like, why did it end that way? That's kind of why. Like, there were certain things where it's like, oh, this didn't just wrap up, and they didn't, find the cure and stop the quarantine. It was meant to go into another series. So, who knows? Maybe we'll get to see them do a season 2 at some point, and it could still technically be a limited series event where it's like, all right, it could be, you know, 12 episodes here and then 12 episodes there, and it could just be that way, and it still counts as a limited series event if it doesn't go beyond, 2 seasons. I guess they could still do it that way, but I would love to see it come back. I feel like they could easily wrap it up, especially with the vaccine thing, because we went through so much, obviously, in just 12 episodes. That's 12 hours, nearly, 12 hours worth of content. So they could easily do that if if CW gave them a season 2. I would love to see that happen. So maybe we will. Most likely we won't, because of how everything, turned out to begin with, where it's like, all right, well, we ordered the series, but we don't want it to go into a big thing, so we'll make it limited. But maybe we'll get something. Who knows? But I would love to see that. I did enjoy this. When I read the article, it was kind of funny. I didn't realize that. I'm not 100% sure what her role is, but Julie Plec, I believe is her name. I didn't realize this, but she worked on Kyle XY, which is another show I used to really like, and that got canceled after 3 seasons, and that did end on like a huge cliffhanger. It was one of those sort of deals. So in the article, she kind of mentioned that, and I was like, man, Kyle XY, I love that show, and it just 3 seasons. It's always the worst. Like, it sucks when the show gets canceled after 1 season, but it's way worse when it continues on for multiple seasons, and then it's like, yeah, let it go, and the network just drops it. Hey, that's the worst thing ever to me. I hate that so much. But I was surprised to read that in the article that she did Kyle XY. Used to love that show. But definitely enjoyed this finale. I do hope that we get something. Maybe they'll do, maybe give them like 2 more episodes or 3 more episodes or something where they kind of jump through a lot of the things or something like that. Maybe just 5 episodes. I think 5 episodes, they could easily wrap it up and just kind of, skip through the days, skip over some of the vaccine stuff. It's like, all right, well, we just do 1 scene on this, and then everything else is character stuff. The next episode has been a couple of days. Boom, the vaccine is there, and kind of just keep it going that way, and we, see some other stuff. Maybe take certain elements out, like maybe the other relationship stuff for Jake. If they actually any of this even ever happened. Maybe take some elements out to actually make it all work. I don't know, but I would love to see them get like a couple more episodes, get something so that they could, officially finish it up. But as a finale, for right now, I think it did wrap up most of the stuff, and they left it. It was like, it wasn't a huge cliffhanger. It was just left open to this could happen, and you could see there being more content. But if this was the official end, it works for everything outside of Mies. That's like the one big cliffhanger that's left there. Everything else is like, all right, well, they found the cure. They'll make the cure. And the Lex stuff is just, well, that he's just going to be in the Cordon and they'll be together now. So it's one of those sort of things where, there could be content, but you can make up your own, and it's simple enough. Just, well, they found the antibodies, boom, they made a cure. He joined Jana, so boom, they got to be together, and then eventually they got right out because they found the cure. And that's it. But I still enjoyed this episode. I do hope we get something, even though I highly doubt it, because otherwise this wouldn't have been a limited series event to begin with. But I guess we can hold out hope for a little bit, but, it's going to be what it's going to be. But for right now, I think this is a fairly good finale. It does leave you wanting more for sure, because I personally love this show. I thought it was a really cool series. But obviously, I want to know what you guys thought about this finale, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts, and of course, I would love to know if you guys would be interested in the season 2, because there's some stuff, like, obviously there are things left open, of course, the Mies thing being number 1, but I would love to know if you guys would be interested enough to see a season 2, or if you're fine with the way it ended, because maybe you're more interested in the beginning, but it kind of waned off for you a little bit. I personally think it just got better, because things just kept getting crazier and crazier, and people, dying off and stuff like that. I personally think it just got better as it went on, but for some people it may not have been that way. So I would love to know if you guys would even want a season 2, and what your favorite moments from this series have been, because it's an interesting show. There's been some quarantine things here and there in movies and stuff, but we don't get too many shows like this, so it was a cool experience. I can't really think of a favorite moment that I could have out of like the entire series, but some things that really stuck out were like some of the early on deaths, like the two guys that I hated, especially the first guy, because that was just a really crazy episode with like the tweakers trying to break into the compound to get the drugs and get the stuff to Huff and everything. That was a pretty crazy episode, and I actually really enjoyed that because it was really intense. And there's a high potential for someone to get sick, which we saw with Teresa's mother by the end of the episode. So that would probably be my favorite. That's kind of what sticks out in my mind right now. And then of course there's some of the bigger moments, which aren't really my favorite, but they're very intense. Like of course Katie dying. This episode with Birdie and his wife dying, which I don't know why I could never remember her name, but I don't know. I just can't. But like I said, I want to know what you guys thought about this finale, if you'd be interested in a season 2, and what some of your favorite moments are from this series. So please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.